After over 160,000 employee layoffs in the tech sector in 2022, 2023 has already followed up with over 100,000 layoffs in just the first 2 months of the year alone. While this pales in comparison to the number of jobs being created in the overall economy, mass layoffs have a huge impact on those affected and the psyche of people in those affected industries. This first episode of Jump the Queue, I talk with three people with interesting angles and insights on this subject, and over the course of these three related yet distinct conversations, you'll hear what's foremost in their minds right now. We start with Michael McMillan, a CX insider and entrepreneur who literally grew up in the call center.
I think this year, a lot of it is focused on, at least especially in this early part of the year, is really all that's going on in the technology sector, especially around the CX space, right? You're seeing a ton of layoffs occurring right now. You're seeing a lot of movement inside of the organizations as well, especially in the technology side. And on top of that, you're seeing this huge surge in demand in automation and AI. And it's such an interesting dynamic to have the two going on at the same time when a demand of technology and dependency of is growing, and we're watching a lot of the support teams being taken out of these same companies. And it's both concerning yet exciting. So it's we're finally getting labor back into the market, I guess you could say. So in one way it's exciting, but in the other way, I know the dependencies that we're growing on our technologies now, especially in this cutting edge stuff with AI. And I'm getting nervous and seeing, and is the team's going to be there to actually support it?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really valid concern, regardless of whether it's I'm using new technologies or I'm using existing technologies from one of these larger providers. And we are absolutely seeing those layoffs keep coming, right? Do you think that that's possibly a springboard for some other companies, whether they exist today or not, to get some of this talent that is now looking for work somewhere else and maybe shake things up?
I do. And we've seen it before, right? If you remember going back here a little bit in the Wayway machine, is there was Right Now Technology back in the day. It was one of my absolute 100% favorite technologies that was on the market. And then Oracle bought them, right? And as soon as Oracle bought them, basically their entire dev team exited stage left, and they went to Zendesk.
Yeah.
And that was really the marker where Zendesk stopped being, the little Buddha dude who actually supported a few companies and started actually really doing something. And I still remember that. And it was really when I started engaging Zen seriously with some pretty big customers. I definitely believe this exodus and these layoffs is going to generate something new. And I've been saying for a while, it's needed. Zendesk is feeling its wares. ServiceNow is ServiceNow. Everyone's running from the hills now from Salesforce if they can, even though they're stuck so hard, but it's so expensive. It's time. Freshdesk is there, but it's not. It's just there's not really a solution there. And then when you get into the CCaaS, UCaaS space, it's kind of a hodgepodge, but there's not anyone I'd say who's really like breaking the mold, right? They're kind of all following. They've kind of, they're what was that game in the 80s? Lemmings, or where they all went off the cliff and stuff.
The lemmings.
Lemmings, yes. It just feels like that. I haven't seen someone who's really. I think it's prime time, and I think with these layoffs, especially in the amount of engineering layoffs that we're seeing, I think you're gonna see something, and I'm excited to see it because it's desperately needed.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that I'm looking forward to the most. Obviously, if you've been impacted by a layoff, is a very
Mm.
personal and scary thing, and certainly don't wish that on anyone. I've been through it, so I know that that is is a really challenging time. At the same time, there's the big possibility of what could come next that seems to be just right around the corner. And I think when we see times like this historically, some great things may come out of it. So
Absolutely. And something you hit on there, Rob, is so key too, is man, because I know a ton of these people who just got laid off, and my heart bleeds for them. And I've been trying to help them as fast as I can. But, you know, we were just having this conversation last week with another one of my groups I'm on. And it's just the hiring market is so broken on top of it too. And so it's like, and that's where I keep telling people, that's where I also think you're going to see some new tech coming, because getting hired is almost impossible right now. The ATS systems are a disaster. You're submitting resumes. I think I just saw a stat. The average resume is looked at in like 2.3 seconds, right? Like that's it. I mean, that you can't make a determination on that. So you're, I think you're about to see a lot of people who can't get back into the market and who have no other choice but to do something. And what they're going to do is start building stuff, and it's going to be exciting to see. But the other part you brought up, Rob, I want to jump back here though, is just, you're right, is this affects on the legacy equipment side too. Um, it keeps reminding me, as I remember, it's probably about 5 years ago, Cisco laid off an entire department of their custom integrations team, the whole thing, not just one, not just two, the whole team, right? And I had a customer who got screwed by it, right? I mean, like, I remember him calling me, and I was still consulting just independently. And he's like, Michael, he goes, please tell me you know one of those people. He goes, because I have a project in flight that
hmm,
they just said now is 2 years backlog because they don't know who's going to do it. I'm like, and that's why I'm nervous, is because I
yeah.
remember my customers and my friends living through this, and like, I'm nervous about how are these companies going to actually step up and step in. And it's a lot of it's the street that's pushing them on this. A
Mm.
lot of them are still making profit. The street demanded higher profits. And that's what my concern is, that I think they're making some pretty scary choices now.
Yeah, it's certainly scary if you're working with them and you have something in flight. It's scary if you're one of the people that's now looking for a job. And it's scary even if you're one of the people that has a great idea and you want to build something new, because that's part of that whole thing. Building
Mm.
something new is scary. It's difficult.
Yeah.
So uh lots of excitement, but yeah, it's a scary world out there these days. So next, I talk with Mark Brody, a contact center vet with over 30 years of experience and the current president of the Austin Contact Center Alliance.
I think you got to have a balance um, between our professional lives and what we really enjoy outside of our work hours. And I think it's what's really on my mind is being able to really balance that out in 2023. Um, every time you open up LinkedIn or turn on the news or whatever, you see another company that's laying off, and the first thing that comes to mind is, my gosh, the people that are being impacted, it's horrible for. And I really want to, as an industry professional, I want to be able to help people out and find their next landing spot and be there to support folks, but also the people that are left. And now they're not just doing their job, but they're probably having to take on additional workload. And
Mm,
from a from a contact center piece, there are positions that probably aren't being filled by some organizations that were open. It's not they had a layoff or a riff, but they may just not be filling some open positions for the time being. Um, and what does that do for those who are left remaining at those companies? How can we make their jobs more efficient, and how can we make them more effective at the job that they're being asked to do. Um, the whole employee experience piece is something that is front and center, and great to spend 40 hours or plus per week at your job, but you still have another 40 hours or so per week that you want to be able to spend with family.
Yeah.
And that there's got to be the balance. So that's really what's on my mind these days.
I just had this conversation with Michael McMillan, and we
Mhm.
talked about layoffs. The difference is, and I think this gets lost sometimes, is considering the people who didn't get laid off and what the impact is on them. So you're
Yeah.
talking about number one, maybe I've got more workload, but there's also this, there is um, a mental struggle that comes with this, right? Because these may be friends of yours, work
Mhm.
friends that no longer are within the workplace. You don't have that camaraderie potentially that you had because people have been let go, and it creates um, a worry that you could be next. Because
Mhm.
when you start to see layoffs, I think there's a natural tendency to worry that more may be coming.
Yep.
And so now I'm worried about my job. I may have more work to do, and
Mhm.
some of my friends are gone. And I think we put all the attention and focus on the people who have lost their jobs. And don't get me wrong, it's really important. Those people are going through a lot too. And it's a very valid worry. But I love that you brought up the people that have been impacted in a completely different way.
It really hit home for me a few years ago, Rob. A company that I worked for went through probably about 5 to 7 layoffs
Wow.
over a 3 to 4 year period. And it's because the business model legislatively changed. Um,
Mm,
and there were people at that time that had already had 30 plus years with the company. I mean, company loyalty was definitely there. It was a great organization to work for. And then you started seeing, the first question that came out is, man, who's impacted? And then the people that had to deliver the news, it's like, how are you doing?
yeah.
Are you okay? Um, Again, to your point, not to diminish the impact that it has in a minute, to those that were affected by a layoff or a reduction in force, or whatever occurs. Um, but it goes to both sides of the equation.
Hmm.
And that's really what's on, like I said, that's what's on my mind this year is, how can I be a good steward of the industry,
Yeah.
and help people find their next landing spot, either proactively or reactively. If they feel that they're going to be impacted at some point in time, well, let's start looking now, so you're better prepared. What's the old saying? You can usually find a job when you're in a job. You know,
Yeah.
um, but sometimes you just don't. You just nothing is guaranteed anymore. So
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I love that. I love that you're looking at a slightly different uh, take on that, and also looking to help.
yeah, definitely. And if anybody that's watching this, Rob, they want to reach out to me, directly through LinkedIn. If I can be of any assistance, can make a connection. That's what networking is all about. And I know you and I are very well connected with different organizations in the industry, and I love the work that you do with Next in Queue,
Appreciate
because it
it.
really helps people understand who and what is out there. So
Yeah,
great job.
absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. And same to you. Coffee Talk with Brohawk. If my listeners aren't aware, you have your own show And yeah, and I got one of those mugs. I don't have it on my desk today, but I do have one of those. And so kudos to you. Thank you. Finally, I chat with Tony Wan, a player experience expert in the gaming industry who's worked with some of the biggest names in the business.
I think our, within the context of the larger society, just thinking about proper boundaries, not necessarily balance, because we will prioritize different things at different times, and that's constantly shifting. But I think being able to have more agency in those decisions, I think, has been a healthy trend, and I hope that we can come to, let's say, healthier relationships between labor and capital over time, because it's been, I think, by the reaction that we're seeing, it has been too lopsided in one direction for too long.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I've been having a lot of conversations this week about all of the layoffs that are happening. I'm wondering, do you think in some ways those are going to counteract some of those kind of new ways of thinking about boundaries? Because is is I wonder, do you think the pendulum might be swinging the other way after we've seen it swing so far in one direction over the last couple of years?
I think that there are some people who will use it to those ends. I hope that by and large it won't happen. Um, but you still have a very strong general push in terms of business ownership, and boards pressing for short-term quarterly gains, and so you get, as a necessity, short-term quarterly thinking, without, in anything that doesn't optimize for that, doesn't get as rewarded. And so people do the right thing for the long term in many cases, despite the short-term incentives and the ways that they're being pushed by various kind of owners and kind of like top level boards and money managers. So my hope is that it doesn't, but that's we will most likely see a number of companies head back in that direction and use use some of that momentum to push people back in the opposite direction. And then you just have, I think, the complication of an individual's preference, because there's some people who are just wired that way. Like, I'm more wired towards overworking. And so if my environment like doesn't put any brakes on that, I could possibly work myself into some really unhealthy situations. But if my work protects me from my own bad habits, then I have a much healthier lifestyle, because my bosses and managers are forcing me to take breaks, for example. So I think it's way too complicated to kind of just paint in everything in too broad of a stroke. I think individual preferences are what they are, and they'll find their places to be. I think bigger market trends, you'll see some big corporations who are just looking to squeeze as much productivity out of people as possible. We'll just continue along those trends, because that's how they kind of continuously squeeze out more profit, or generate more profit from the additional efficiency. And then hopefully you'll see a string of new companies that have what I would call a more reasonable approach to growth, which is, we want to grow. Absolutely. We're in business, right? We need to make money.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we want to have a legacy of a business that will outlast us and kind of go into the future and continue to produce good services, good products, whatever those may be. But hopefully we can do so in a way that creates the largest net positive for society, plus the people who actually work at this company. Because that is the right thing to do, and is much better for, you have all these CSR kind of initiatives. Well, if you just ran your company in a better way, a lot of those would just go away. Like, you wouldn't have to like silo it off in the corner and say, oh, we have to do something for corporate social responsibility. because it's like PR coverage, right? And like I think the general public is sick of that kind of stuff because they're like, well, you're just greenwashing or whatever it is that you're washing. You're just, having kind of some kind of cover story for, oh, look, we're actually good, when the core of your business is still optimized towards human suffering or externalities or whatever you want to call them, right? Like, or oh, it's just not part of our business, it's just an externality, like it's just collateral damage. It's like, oh, those dead people, like, okay. So there's
You know what I love about you, Tony? You consider nuance. And I don't think there's enough of that in the world. And I'm being dead serious. You consider nuance, and that there is not necessarily issues are not black and white for you.
hardly.
You understand that there is gray in the middle, and that we want to try and find the best shade of gray to be in, and that will vary a little bit over time.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to explore this thing about boundaries just a little bit more, because I find it interesting that you recognize that you have a challenge in setting those boundaries between work and personal life. And I think a lot of people will identify with that, aside from just external forces, right? The people that you work with helping you kind of put up those boundaries. What's worked for you?
Mm. I would say a couple of things, just to summarize. One would be taking the time out to consider a moral framework for yourself. So whatever that is, for some people, it's kind of a plug and play religion. For others, it's a set of different, maybe mental models and philosophers that they gravitate towards, and they construct something that they like. For some people, it's stoicism, a certain kind of philosophy. And so I always encourage people who are struggling with drawing those boundaries to start at the most fundamental place you can, which is yourself, right? Like, what do you actually value? Because if you can't figure that out, and you can't name it, and you can't create for yourself a hierarchy of values, you have no way to prioritize your time. And work is so easy to say, oh, work, and then just make that general thing your life. And it doesn't matter what falls into that, bad or good, or what work forces you to do, or how it forces you to behave, or how it forces you to treat other people. Those things will be there just because you're a human being. And I like to think that most people are like, oh, like this stuff happens, but then you go by it so fast, it could be a mistake. You could end up making decisions that degrade your soul or your spirit, so to speak, in a manner that you will find to be too detrimental over time, where people have feelings of losing themselves, for example, or like not knowing, like something happens and maybe they have a life event and they're like, what have I been doing with my life, or something like that, or a health situation, and then they snap out of it. But I like to hope that people don't have to have such extreme events to be able to invest in themselves in that way. And I think once you kind of set that in a decent amount of order, then you can think about, okay, so work fits into this. This is the most important things. Work fits into that. And then therefore, like, how much of that fits into it? And you'll see this with, there's been surveys done on younger generations where it's like, oh, it's a lot less about the monetary compensation and much more about quality of life or experiences, just as a very broad stroke.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, okay, well, that means people have sat down and thought about it. They're like, yeah, I saw a bunch of people work primarily for money. It doesn't look too good. You know, like the younger people are like, that doesn't look too healthy. Like, I don't, I saw my parents do it. I don't want to do it. Or maybe something along those lines.
Yeah.
And so they're choosing to value other things, but you have to put in that time to say, oh, I will value these other things more. Therefore, I won't do X, Y, or Z. And so I think that's fundamental. And then I would say, paying very close attention to the people in your life that you're closest to and want to be close to, family, friends, loved ones, and making sure that you're continually investing time into those relationships. Because I think there's a false narrative around, oh, it's not quantity, it's quality, as if those things are always separate. But with human beings, they're not always separate. It's like, I definitely will think that you care more about me if you spend more of your time together with me, right? Like, I think that's a normal human being thing. So unless I'm really off here, but I mean, those things aren't always so cleanly cut or separate. I think it's a justification for people who want to appear to be able to be superhuman when 99.9% of us are just normal people, and we need better strategies for, setting these boundaries. And so, I think it's really about, you can only get off the social media stuff. You can only actually be really good friends with a very small number of people.
Yeah.
Choose those people, invest time in those relationships, and that will start to structure some of your life where you're like, well, I gotta spend time with this person. Like, I have to spend time with my wife. We have to have, date night at this set. I can't compromise on that. And so it'll naturally, because other people will want your time, your loved ones will want your time and energy, it'll help you structure things in a way so that those relationships can be healthy, as well as your relationship with work. And so I think that's, my second large piece of advice is really around making sure that you're, and that helps you live longer. We all know it's like whoever has stronger social connections and deeper ones tend to live longer and be happier and healthier. So it's like, okay, cool. Like deep social connections, you aren't going to get that unless you put the time in. And so it's like, okay, who are those people? Why those people? And then sure, like actually do it, like go for it. And that'll help you structure, because they'll be like, yeah, I want more of your time,
Yeah.
We should go here, we should do this. And well, you got to be there for that stuff. And that means you can't be working and you can't have your mind. Like, this is one thing my wife and I had to separate. It's like, hey, I work from home, so you got to give me 25 minutes as soon as I turn this stuff off to go walk around or do something else before I'm actually at home. Like my whole brain is at home, right? So yeah, I think those things are helpful.
Those are incredibly helpful. I know they are. Some of those things absolutely resonate with me, and I think all of us can do a better job of being intentional about spending time with people we care about. Next in Queue is brought to you by Happy To and is produced by me, Rob Dwyer. If you enjoy this podcast, please by all means subscribe and or rate this podcast in iTunes or your favorite podcast app. But more importantly, please tell just one person about this podcast. Word of mouth is the best way for people to discover new content. As always, thanks for listening.